I don't watch as many movies or TV shows as I used to, but I've been a fan of Lord of the Rings ever since I was a kid. In fact, The Hobbit was one of the very first books I read cover to cover. So when I heard there was a TV series coming out called Rings of Power, I knew that eventually I was going to watch it, although I was very skeptical, like a lot of Lord of the Rings fans are, about how well it was going to play out. So I was pleasantly surprised to find that it was very well done. The acting was good. The special effects were amazing. In fact, apparently it was the most expensive series ever created. So a lot of effort went into making this great. And I've made this point in other blogs and videos that it's astounding to me how Hollywood and these big filmmaking companies, they know how to make great stuff when they want to. And it just sort of begs the question, why do they put out so much trash? So this article by ScreenRant.com is asking the question, even though there's no question mark here, are there black elves in the Lord of the Rings books and movies? And obviously, the implication is that the character we're looking at here is black. He's a black elf. Well, is he a black elf? When I first saw this character, who's played by Ismael Cordova, I thought to myself, a half black, half white, or biracial character as an elf. That's interesting. It stood out right away, as it did with any Lord of the Rings fan. And you can't really find any specific reference to black-skinned elves or darker-skinned elves in the Tolkien extended universe. Although there are references to darker elves. Now, Dungeons and Dragons, the old role-playing game from the late 70s and 80s, did include drow elves, or these dark elves, which live in the underworld, live underground. And of course, they were kind of like the evil twin counterpart to the above-ground elves. They're very mysterious and magical, and they tend to be violent, and they worship some kind of spider queen. And the dark elf cosmology is fleshed out a lot in the Dark Elf trilogy, written by R.A. Salvatore, part of the Forgotten Realms series, which is an extension of Dungeons and Dragons. Now, I read this book, and I thought it was awesome. It kind of blew my mind as a teenager. And you could say that it addresses very specific social issues having to do with race and ethnicity and culture and everything. It does a really good job at putting you in the mind of this guy who, even by his own culture and, ethnical standards, he's a rebel. So you get to walk around with him and watch as he, may at times embrace certain stereotypes about him when it's advantageous and reject them when it's convenient or when it's inconvenient because he was just an individual. Duart Drizzt doesn't necessarily have to be, European or, African or whatever race, in our real world that you want to superimpose upon him. He doesn't necessarily have to be any of those things in order for people of any race or ethnicity to relate to his struggles and his triumphs and tragedies. So anyway, getting back to the question of, is Ismael Cordova black? Well, we're told he's Puerto Rican, and he's often called Latino as well. And in fact, in this article, he's called black and Latino later in the article, which is interesting because in the headline, you're sort of insinuating that he's black, and that's all he is. But you can see his parents. Look at his mother. She looks white. Look at her hair. She doesn't even look part black. And his dad looks like he's at least part black, but look at how light his skin is. So he looks like he's perhaps biracial as well. So, in Puerto Rico, if you look at the racial demographic, it's called Puerto Rico because Spanish Europeans conquered it once upon a time. I asked ChatGPT about the ethnic and racial background of Spain. And GPT said Spanish people are typically considered part of the European or Caucasian racial category. Typically. That doesn't mean always. So what I'm saying is Cordova's mother could very well be white. That's a reasonable assumption to make. It may not be true. So when I first looked at him and I said, well, that looks like a biracial guy, part black and probably part something else. That's not a controversial statement. It's a reasonable assumption to make. Some of you might remember this basketball player by the name of Manute Bol. I believe he was the tallest basketball player ever in the NBA. He was over 7 feet tall. And you can see he's a black guy. You know, he's Sudanese. I think it's safe to say that both of his parents were probably Sudanese. I couldn't really find pictures of them. So imagine Ismael Cordova going over to Africa and hanging out with Manute Bol and saying, hey, I'm going to join you guys on your little hunt today. And, you know, the other people in the tribe say, oh, isn't this great? We're diversifying our ethnicity here by allowing this European guy to join us on this trip. You know, can you see that perspective? I mean, again, look at Manute Bol, look at him. You know, they would see him probably as European. They're not going to be like, oh, right on, brother. You know, welcome to the party. You're one of us. You know, I mean, not that they would reject him because he looks different than them, but they're obviously going to notice that he's a lot lighter than them. So from their perspective, they're probably going to see him as European. And he can sit there and go, well, that's not fair. I'm black like you. And they're going to go, well, yeah, but come on. Richard Pryor, one of the great comedians, said that when he went to Africa, someone told him, oh, what are you, Italian? Kamala Harris is half Indian and half black. And her dad is actually a light-skinned black man. So her dad might be part something else. I don't know. She might be tri-racial. But, you know, she's been criticized for at times calling herself the first Indian American of such and such. And then at another time saying, I'm the first black American of such and such. Barack Obama is half white. And you can see that's his mother. She's stark white. I mean, she's ghostly white. So, you know, am I saying that Obama wasn't the first black president? Well, he's the first biracial president, that's for sure. It just seems like in America we've been programmed to see an individual who is part black. We've been programmed to see them as all black and sort of ignore their other characteristics, especially if they're white. I don't know what that means exactly. I think it's a little bit odd. The Rings of Power Arondir backlash is absurd. Backlash? They're making it sound like there's all these Nazi whatever Tolkien fans out there just parading through the streets, screaming in anger, like, how dare they put a black man as an elf in Lord of the Rings? I mean, of course that isn't happening, but you see lots of articles like this on the internet, and the media is clearly has an agenda to exaggerate the quote-unquote backlash. Cordova, also known for playing Mando on Sesame Street, is an actor from Puerto Rico who is black and Latino. Which makes you wonder, how come the headline didn't say, are there Latino elves in the Lord of the Rings books and movies? Early images of him in trailers and promotional materials brought out some hand-wringing and complaints about an elf being played by a person of color. Which I guess is to say someone who isn't white. Anyone who isn't white. So we're making it a lot more broad now. Much of the backlash equates Arondir with Hollywood's history of changing the race or gender of major characters. This simply is not the case here, as Arondir is a new character who happens to be played by a black actor. So they're saying that there's no woke agenda to this character because they didn't do the typical cliche thing of changing white character into a black character. Like, for example, you know, doing Snow White and then making Snow White be played by a black woman and going, oh, what's wrong with that? You got a problem with that? You know, they're saying that that's not what they're doing because they made the character up. So I don't know. I hear ScreenRant.com is actually sort of admitting to you here what they're doing, but trying to turn it around on you and sort of trick you and go, No, you don't see it that way, see it this way. Elvish characters in the original Lord of the Rings books are described as being fair-skinned, but none of the language used definitively states that elves were only fair-skinned beings. Okay, so they just admitted that Tolkien's descriptions of the elves call them fair-skinned, which means light-skinned, white. Does that mean that there's a problem putting darker-skinned elves in a Tolkien film? Let's remember that the Tolkien estate was not necessarily big on the idea of any of the books being put to screen. Even back in the 70s when the original animated Lord of the Rings came out, the Tolkien estate wasn't necessarily all on board with that. And if you read about the Lord of the Rings movies of the early 2000s, the Tolkien estate wasn't necessarily all into that either. So you're already talking about, a fickle Tolkien estate, fickle fans. So obviously to do something like this, it's not, their first goal is not to simply, diversify and elevate certain races and equality and all this politically correct nonsense that they try to say they're doing. That's not really what they're doing. What they're doing is they're trying to create racial divisiveness in society by doing this. And all of these, ScreenRant.coms and, Yahoo News and Vulture.com or whatever, all these different media outlets, if you notice, they all take the same viewpoint on this issue, if you go read them all. And how are they being impartial if they're all taking the same view? I mean, if they were all being neutral, I think CNN, surprisingly, had one of the most neutral and thorough articles that I found on this topic. But they still make it very clear where they lean. Like, we lean on the side of this is great, and anyone who says it isn't great is obviously a racist. I'm being a little bit sarcastic there, but not that sarcastic. Now, there's something else that I found kind of interesting about this character, Arondir, when I first laid eyes on him, and that was how he sort of looked like a young Obama to me. Now, you may say, oh, you're such a racist. Just because he's a lighter complexion black man doesn't mean he looks like Obama. Okay, well, Obama is known for having big ears. And there's lots of memes. That's where these memes come from, you see? I mean, that's an actual picture of him. He's got huge ears. What I'm suggesting is that this character may have been chosen because he's somewhat Obama-like, and the ears are a cue. The big elf ears, they do something in the back of your mind where you go, big ears, biracial, well-spoken, perhaps exposed to a lot of white culture, perhaps educated. Elves are, considered sort of high society. You might say, white, aristocratic European society. So I think there's something to this. And interestingly enough, there is a horse in this show called Barack. Now, Barack is Obama's first name, Barack Obama. And what color is this horse? He's brown. So again, is this a coincidence? Am I just crazy? Am I just making associations because, I'm a racist and I'm just looking for racial stuff? The media is making a big deal. The media is saying that there's all these people complaining about the racial diversity of the characters. The media is making a big deal about it. So I'm commenting on the media making a big deal about it and adding my own observations. Why would they put this great horse and create this character arc around this horse that doesn't exist in the original, Tolkien writings? This is the horse of Isildur. Isildur is a very important character. He's very heroic. He's Aragorn's relative. And he, I think, is the character at the beginning of Fellowship of the Ring, the movie, that ends up cutting off the ring from Sauron's hand. So his horse is an important symbolic figure that they made up for this show and named him Barack. Now, what does Barack mean? Barak, also spelled Barak or Barak Q with a Q, is a given name of Arabic origin. From the Semitic root BRK, it means blessed, and is most commonly used in its feminine form, Baraka. The religion of Saudi Arabia, the primary religion, is Muslim. And who is Arondir's love interest in this? She is a woman named Bronwyn, who is played by Nazanin Boniadi. She was born in Tehran. She's Iranian, and she's a activist, and she's involved in all these Iranian issues, which is fine. I'm not criticizing that. But it's also true that Iran is thought to fund a lot of terrorist activity, Muslim extremist terrorist activity, such as Hamas. Hamas took credit for slaughtering many Israelis in the October 7 incident in 2023. So, I'm not blaming her for that, but I'm just noting in the mid-2000s, she was a dedicated Scientologist. Scientologist. Her mother had also been a Scientologist. So, multi-generational Scientologist. In late 2004 to early 2005, she allegedly had a brief relationship with actor Tom Cruise, the most famous Scientologist that we know of. Boniadi left the Church of Scientology soon after, and in October 2014 called herself a non-practicing Muslim. And there's actually another Iranian actor in this. Sophia Namvit plays what the media is calling a black dwarf. She's actually, I guess, half Iranian. So that's kind of interesting. A couple Iranian characters playing major roles in what could be regarded as a mostly pagan story. Now, Tolkien was a contemporary and went to school with, and I believe was friends with C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis wrote Chronicles of Narnia, which has a more Christian leaning. Tolkien's world is closer to, I would say, paganism, or, like Norse mythology, Midgard, Middle-earth, the Great Tree. These are things that appear in Norse mythology. Tolkien, being a white British guy, living at a time and place in history where he was probably surrounded by a lot of white people, he dealt with material where people looked like him, because that's what he was involved with. I don't think it was a case of, I hate people that aren't white, so I'm only going to write about white people. I mean, in African mythology, everyone looks African, everyone looks black, because those are the people who are writing it, or perhaps they believe the gods that the stories are about are black and look like them. It's not about, I hate Chinese people or I hate white people or whatever. It's just, this is what they look like, so this is what their stories were about. If you went up there and put, Jackie Chan in place of this guy, like you did, maybe Black Panther, okay? And you took Jackie Chan and put him in the role and went, what's the matter? Why are you so racist? What's wrong with a Chinese guy playing the Black Panther? I mean, that would be absurd, right? In Hindu mythology, you've got, blue people, you've got green people, but they're all Indian looking, because those are either the people who wrote the stories, or, the gods that supposedly are that are being written about are Indian gods. So they're tales about Indian people. They're not going to throw in a token like, black person or white person just to meet some, standard that thousands of years later would be, regarded as essential in Hollywood. They're not going to care about that. And it doesn't mean they're racist. It doesn't mean they hate other people that don't look like them. Chinese mythology, same thing. But for some reason, Hollywood wants to say that, it's they want to ask the question, is Tolkien a racist because he didn't, include specifically people with African features in his stories? I mean, that's not what they say literally, but that's kind of what they're saying without specifically saying it. The original stories of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings are epic tales of people of different races, dwarves, elves, humans, and hobbits, uniting to fight the forces of evil to save all inhabitants of Middle-earth. Okay, so they're saying it right there. I mean, the idea, the morals, like a lot of fairy tales have a moral. There's always something, we hope, positive to be said. Evil's bad, good is good, good triumphs over evil. And you've got different types of people, different races working together to make that happen. So you've already got the racial quota in a sense. You don't really need to teach people a lesson about race because it's already built in the story. But instead of just stating that, like, we're just trying to meet more diverse quotas in the movie industry, instead of saying that, they use it as a tool to sort of demonize people. Like, people will criticize it and go, hey, we see what you're doing. You're just trying to meet, racial diversity quotas. So then all these articles start turning those people into bad people, racist people. And you start to see that the point of this quote-unquote racial diversity and equality. The point of this in a series like Rings of Power is to create divisive conversations, not for the good of the people, but for the bad of the people, to create more division in society, to put people on this side or that side. And we know that, Donald Trump, one of the reasons he won his second term, some might say third term, was because a lot of blacks and Latinos became disillusioned with the Democratic Party and switched over to the right. I'm not saying all of them, but a good percentage of them did. And, if any of you were paying attention, you saw even outlets like CNN and such would have these little segments where, like, the newscaster would look alarmed, like, oh my God, I can't believe, why are all these blacks and Latinos, moving to the right? Well, you alienated them by with all the woke shit. I'm sorry to say. I guess I can say it now that Trump won. So, before the election 2022, a lot of these movies and TV shows, they're trying to make sure that these demographics, like, Mexicans, non-whites, blacks, and women, they got to make sure they keep those people in the Democratic Party so that their candidate can win. So yeah, race is very important to these people that make these, just like I pointed out in the Watchmen TV series, which came out before the 2020 election. And they turned Dr. Manhattan into a black guy who's blue. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, Dr. Manhattan was played originally by Billy Crudup. He has godlike powers. Okay, Billy Crudup is a white guy. In the series, he's now played by a black guy. A black guy that turns blue and gets godlike powers. You catch the symbolism there? In other words, if you're white, you need to turn black, and then you need to turn blue. That's the color of the Democratic Party. There's actually an entity called Act Blue, and they funnel money to the Democratic Party. Why do they call it Act Blue? Because they want you to act blue. They want you to vote left. This is all politically motivated. I'm not the one putting this stuff out there. I'm just responding to it. And they want you to respond to it, because if they didn't, they wouldn't put it out there. So anyone who doesn't respond to this divisive, race hustling in the way that they like, they're going to try and make you out to be a racist. And once they do that, they can sick the mob on you. And now what you say is no longer going to be taken seriously, even if it completely makes sense. Now, the last character I want to talk about here is Theo, who is the son of Bronwyn. And this is the kid that sort of is holding the relic that Sauron's minions are looking for. And Theo, his character is a little bit interesting, because you can tell that he's being seduced by evil, and he's kind of wrestling with, his morality is being tested, and he ends up being sort of a tool that is used to bring Sauron back via this key, or this tool that he is hiding initially. And he's played by an actor called Tyro Muhaffadin, which I thought was an interesting name. So I asked myself, well, we've got all these ethnically diverse characters. So I just looked up his name. And here he is, and I don't know, he looks like he might be Middle Eastern. They say he's Australian. But if you look up his profile, there's something about, he likes to hide his educational background or something. You notice more and more in this age where it's really easy to look people up, a lot of actors more and more are trying to hide their background. And I think part of that is legitimately they just want some privacy. But I think another part of that is they don't want people like me figuring out who they are and what their connections are and go, wait a minute. There's some weird, ulterior motive going on with this guy's entire career. And I'm not saying that's the case with Tyro here. I'm just saying, in general, I'm making a statement about the hiding of the backgrounds of some of these famous people. So I looked up the word Tyro, the name Tyro, the etymology. Etymonline.com, Tyro means a beginner in learning anything. Young soldier, recruit, beginner. Kind of makes sense. He's young. And he's a soldier at times in the story. And then I looked up his last name, Muhaffadin. Now, you thought I was making a big deal about this Muslim thing, like, oh, why are you picking on people for being from Iran or being Muslim or whatever? The word mujahidin sounds very similar to muhafidin. It's just one letter difference. Look at what this word means. Muslim fundamentalist guerrilla, 1958, in a Pakistani context from Persian and Arabic, plural of mujahid, one who fights in a jihad. A jihad is a holy war. That's what Muslim terrorists, like the ones who slaughtered Israelis on October 7, 2023, they were jihadists. So this is the kid that basically was hiding the tool of the enemy and was, in a way you could say, like a turncoat, perhaps an inadvertent turncoat. So I'm going to stop there, but I think that's enough for you people to chew on, and hopefully enough for you to see that this isn't just a bunch of nonsense. There's actually something going on here with all the symbolism and names. Before closing this out, I wanted to add a little bit to my last video where I talked about my own personal experiences taking LSD. And, you know, it was a long time ago, and I realized there's a lot I can't remember. And so in reading about all this counterculture stuff from the 60s and researching the Beatles and Pink Floyd, and I got a lot of crazy stuff I got coming up on future blog regarding this. But I in reading about other people's LSD experiences, I remembered something that I was really into, and that was this idea of a collective intelligence. And I believe that my interest in this type of a science was motivated by the fact that I didn't grow up really with any religion or spiritual beliefs specific per se. I mean, there was Buddhism being practiced in my household growing up, but I didn't really pursue that very much. I was very much on a spiritual journey, probably not that dissimilar to the individuals in the 60s psychedelic movement. The whole thing in the 60s was about rejecting tradition. And a lot of these individuals that became prominent in the LSD scene came from like Christian backgrounds or perhaps atheist backgrounds. But, the experience of taking LSD was so perception altering that they were sitting here questioning everything that was normal. And for me personally, I sort of gravitated towards this idea that there's some kind of, science out there in the universe that I could tap into. And I was fascinated by the idea of, I can understand everything. I could, I guess, be God is what I was really sort of after. And I think we all sort of intuitively know, I think common sense somewhere in our brain tells us, you are not God. You can't be God. And if you start reaching for things that are causing you to conclude that you are God somehow, that you are the center of the universe in that sense, you're on the wrong path. And I feel like almost every blog is becoming a sermon at this point. But, I'm just telling you this my experience with whatever I was looking for, it was God, You can sit here and try and mechanically reverse engineer a flower, a star, the universe, the way gravity works and all this stuff. And some of that stuff is very useful. Science is very useful. It's a good thing. I'm not anti-science. I'm not anti-physics. But there's a point where you just got to draw a line. And I crossed that line a couple times and I got burned almost literally. I mean, I had a terrible incident either when I was on acid or when I was coming off of acid, where I literally felt this lightning bolt go through my body. It was terrifying. And I'm not saying my experience is everyone's experience. Other people have had very positive experiences on LSD, I'm sure, and have found, very positive results with their spiritual endeavors with Hinduism or whatever, Eastern religions or what have you. Even maybe the tarot stuff, the Crowley stuff. But I'm just telling you, okay, from my point of view, as objective as I can be, God was what I needed. Trying to reach for the stars, I mean, it was a Flight of Icarus kind of scenario. for me. And so I just wanted to put that out there. That was a sort of realization resulting from experiences I had from LSD. And as I said before, I don't do it anymore. But there was a lot that occurred there with my experience with LSD, a lot of which I don't remember. And that was one little piece that sort of came back to me recently that I thought I'd share to close this out.